Emma Thorne sighed as she pulled her rental car up to the old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Denver. The late October wind whipped dead leaves across the gravel driveway, the sun already setting behind the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Her grandmother's attorney had been clear. To claim her inheritance, Emma would need to stay in the Beck house for 3 nights, the same house where her grandmother and great-aunt had grown up over a century ago. "This is ridiculous," Emma muttered, grabbing her suitcase from the trunk. At 35, she was a practical woman, a history professor specializing in early 20th century America. She had no time for her grandmother's eccentricities, even posthumously. But the inheritance was substantial, enough to pay off her student loans and fund her research for years to come. The key turned reluctantly in the lock. The door creaked open to reveal a foyer frozen in time. The house had been maintained but unoccupied for decades, preserved as some kind of museum to the Beck family. Emma's phone buzzed, a text from her sister Charlotte. "Arrived safely? Call me when you're settled." Emma responded quickly before exploring the house. The furnishings were authentic early 1900s, with heavy velvet curtains, ornate woodwork, and a large fireplace in the main sitting room. Above the mantel hung a portrait of 2 young women in high-necked dresses, posing formally by the very same fireplace. "Great-grandmother Elizabeth and great-aunt Catherine," Emma murmured, recognizing them from family albums. The sisters looked remarkably similar, with the same dark hair and solemn expressions that seemed to follow Emma as she moved about the room. In the kitchen, Emma found a folder with her name on it. Inside was a letter from her grandmother, written 6 months before her death. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I've passed on, and you've agreed to stay at Beck House. I know this request seems strange, but there are truths about our family that can only be understood within these walls. The house holds secrets that have shaped our lineage for generations. Your great-grandmother Elizabeth and her sister Catherine were photographed by the fireplace in 1906. That photograph revealed something that changed our family forever. In the mirror behind them appeared a 3rd figure, another sister, whom no one remembered being present that day. Find the original photograph in the study upstairs. Look closely. History is rarely what it seems." With love and hope for understanding, Grandmother Marian Emma snorted. Ghost stories and family legends weren't her style. Nevertheless, she climbed the creaking stairs to the 2nd-floor study. The room was lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. In the corner drawer, she found an envelope containing a sepia-toned photograph, the original image that had inspired the portrait downstairs. 2 young women, Elizabeth and Catherine, posed stiffly by the fireplace. Behind them hung a large, ornate mirror, and in its reflection, Emma's breath caught. There was indeed a 3rd figure visible in the mirror, standing slightly behind the sisters, her face partially obscured, but clearly female, with the same dark hair as the Beck sisters. "A double exposure or photographic error," Emma said aloud, though her academic mind noted that such an error would be unusual for the time. Photography in 1906 was deliberate, expensive, and carefully executed. As evening fell, Emma continued exploring the house, taking notes for her own research. The 3rd floor was mostly closed off, but one bedroom had been prepared for her with fresh linens. On the nightstand sat a journal with a note attached. Elizabeth's diary, 1906-1907. Emma settled into bed with the journal, professional curiosity overcoming her skepticism. The early entries were mundane accounts of Denver society life, until she reached October 27, 1906. "Catherine and I posed for a photograph today by the fireplace. Mother insisted we document our new dresses before the harvest ball. Something strange happened. The photographer seemed disturbed when reviewing his plate, asking if another young woman had been present. Of course, there was no one else, just us sisters. I feel uneasy tonight. Catherine keeps insisting she hears someone walking in the hallway. I told her it's just the house settling, but she claims she can hear humming, the lullaby our mother used to sing. I've locked my door. Emma checked the date on her phone, October 27th, exactly 119 years later. A coincidence, she told herself, though the hair on her arms stood on end. The next entry was even more disturbing, October 28th, 1906. The photograph was delivered today. Mother nearly fainted when she saw it. There is a third figure in the mirror behind us, a young woman who looks remarkably like Catherine and me. Father tore up the photograph and forbade us to speak of it, but the photographer had already made several copies for our family album. Catherine is frantic. She says she's seen the woman standing at the foot of her bed last night. Father called for the doctor, who prescribed a sedative for her nerves. I haven't told anyone, but I too have seen her. Not in person, but every time I look in the mirror, I see her standing behind me for just a moment before she vanishes. She seems to be trying to speak. Mother finally confessed tonight. There was a third sister, our triplet Margaret, who died at birth. They never told us about her, believing it would upset us too much. But how can her image appear now, 19 years later? Emma closed the journal, a chill running through her despite the heavy quilt. Academic rationality told her this was simply a family myth that had grown over generations. And yet, the photograph was compelling evidence of something. She decided to call her sister Charlotte, needing the comfort of a familiar voice. "So you're really staying in that creepy old house?" Charlotte laughed after Emma described her surroundings. "It's not creepy. It's historically significant," Emma corrected her. "Although grandmother did leave me a weird task involving a family ghost story." "About the third sister in the mirror?" "Mom told me that one when we were kids." Emma sat up straight. "You knew about this?" "Sure. Grandmother Marion mentioned it every Halloween. She claimed the third sister, Margaret, I think, tries to communicate with the women in our family. Something about a warning or unfinished business." "Why didn't I ever hear this story?" Charlotte's voice softened. You were always so practical. You dismissed anything supernatural. Remember when I had those nightmares about a woman standing in my doorway when I was 12? You told me it was just sleep paralysis. A sudden draft made the curtains billow. Emma glanced at the bedroom mirror and for a split second thought she saw movement reflected in it. Just a shadow, quickly gone. "I should get some sleep," Emma said abruptly. "I'll call you tomorrow." After hanging up, Emma couldn't resist checking the mirror again. Nothing unusual reflected back at her, just her own tired face. She laughed at herself, realizing how quickly the power of suggestion had affected her. As she drifted off to sleep, the sound of the old house creaking around her, Emma's last thoughts were of the photograph and the mysterious third sister who had supposedly died at birth. If the story were true, what could Margaret possibly want after all these years? In her dreams, Emma stood in the sitting room downstairs. The fireplace was lit, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Two young women in period dresses stood by the mantel, speaking in hushed tones. "She mustn't find out what really happened," one whispered. "It's too late," the other replied. "She's already here. The pattern repeats." They turned toward Emma simultaneously, their faces identical to each other and eerily similar to her own. "She's watching us again," they said in unison, looking past Emma to the large mirror on the wall. Emma turned to follow their gaze. In the mirror stood a third woman, her dress identical to the sisters', her face a perfect match to theirs, and to Emma's own. The woman in the mirror raised her finger to her lips in a silencing gesture, then pointed to the floorboards beneath the rug. Emma woke with a start, her heart pounding. The bedside clock read 3:17 a.m. The room was freezing cold, despite the modern heating system that had been installed in the old house. Her breath fogged in front of her face. Acting on impulse, she grabbed her phone for light and made her way downstairs to the sitting room. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of timber. In the sitting room, the fireplace stood cold and dark, the portrait of the sisters barely visible in the dim light from the windows. Emma switched on a lamp and approached the large area rug in front of the fireplace. She rolled it back, revealing wide oak floorboards, darkened with age. Nothing unusual was visible, but as she knelt down, she noticed one board that seemed slightly different from the others. The grain didn't quite match. Using a letter opener from the nearby desk, Emma pried at the edge of the board. It lifted surprisingly easily, as if it had been removed many times before. Beneath it was a small cavity containing a metal box. With trembling hands, Emma lifted out the box and opened it. Inside was another journal, much older than the one she'd been reading upstairs, its leather cover cracked and faded. Also in the box was a small daguerreotype in a tarnished silver frame, an image of 3 identical infant girls. The journal bore the name Margaret Beck on its first page, followed by an inscription, "My true account, to be revealed when justice can finally be served." As Emma opened the journal to its first entry, the lamp beside her flickered. In the mirror across the room, she caught a glimpse of movement. A woman in a high-necked dress, watching her with solemn eyes that matched her own. The lamp stabilized as Emma stared at the mirror, her heart racing. The figure was gone, if it had ever been there at all. She blamed her imagination, fueled by the house's atmosphere and her grandmother's stories. Turning her attention back to Margaret's journal, she began to read. April 18th, 1906. I exist, though the world does not know it. My sisters Elizabeth and Catherine flourish in Denver society, while I remain hidden in this house, confined to the 3rd floor. Mother and father claim it's for my protection, that my delicate condition would shock polite society. But I know the truth. They fear what people would say about having identical triplets. In their superstition, they believe we are an ill omen, especially after the midwife called us 3 souls sharing one face. Elizabeth knows I'm here. Sometimes she brings me books and tells me of parties and suitors. Catherine has not been told. Father fears her nervous disposition would lead her to reveal my existence. How strange to have one sister who acknowledges me and another who doesn't know I breathe the same air under this roof. Emma paused, processing this revelation. Not a sister who died at birth, but one hidden away. A dark family secret kept even from one of the triplets. She continued reading, flipping through entries that detailed Margaret's isolated life, her observations of the family from her 3rd floor window, and her growing resentment. October 25th, 1906. I overheard Father discussing my future today. The Beckton Asylum has agreed to take me as a private resident. They believe I suffer from delusions and hysteria. My own parents are planning to commit me to an asylum simply for existing. Elizabeth promised to help me escape before they can send me away. We have devised a plan. The next entry was dated 2 days later, the day of the photograph. October 27th, 1906. Our plan failed. Elizabeth convinced Mother and Father to have a photograph taken of her and Catherine by the fireplace. I was to slip downstairs and join them at the last moment, revealing myself to the photographer and forcing my parents to acknowledge me. But Father caught me on the stairs and locked me in my room. In my fury, I broke the mirror in my bathroom. As I gathered the shards, I cut my hand deeply. The blood pooled on the floor as I pressed my eye to the keyhole, watching the photographer set up his equipment through the banister rails. I wished so desperately to be in that photograph, to be acknowledged as a Beck daughter. Something strange happened then. As the flash powder ignited, I felt a pulling sensation, as if part of me was being drawn out through my eyes. For a moment I thought I was standing behind my sisters, looking into the large mirror above the fireplace. Then I was back in my room, dizzy and confused, my blood-soaked hand throbbing. Elizabeth came to me later, white-faced. She said my image appeared in the photograph's reflection, though I was locked upstairs. The photographer was baffled. Father is furious, demanding all copies be destroyed. What power allowed me to project myself into that moment? And can I use it again to escape this prison? Emma glanced nervously at the mirror, half expecting to see Margaret watching her. The journal continued with increasingly disturbing entries. November 1st, 1906. I've discovered something remarkable. When I stand before my cracked mirror and focus on another reflective surface in the house, I can sometimes see through it, as if looking through a window. Better still, if I concentrate hard enough while touching the mirror with my wounded hand, I can make others see me in those reflections. Though I remain physically in my room, Elizabeth is terrified now. She says I appear behind her in every mirror, my lips moving silently. She no longer comes to visit me. Catherine has taken to her bed with nervous exhaustion after seeing my reflection beside her while brushing her hair. Only the servants still bring my meals, and they leave them outside my door, refusing to look at me. Father has called for a specialist from the asylum to come tomorrow. I must act tonight. The next entry was written in a shaky hand, the page stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. November 2nd, 1906. What have I done? I only wanted to trade places with Elizabeth, just for one day to experience freedom. I discovered that if I concentrate hard enough while touching a mirror, I can do more than project my image. I can reach through somehow. Tonight, I convinced Elizabeth to come to my room one last time. I embraced her before the broken mirror, pressing my still healing hand against the glass. I felt that strange pulling sensation again, stronger this time. For a moment, we were both reflected in the shards, 3 identical faces, though there were only 2 of us in the room. Then Elizabeth was gone. The mirror shows only my reflection now, but I hear her pounding on the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream. I've tried to reverse what happened, but I don't know how. I've put on her dress. No one has noticed the difference yet. I've hidden this journal where I hope someone will eventually find it. I fear what I've done is irreversible. Elizabeth is trapped somewhere behind the glass, and I am finally free, though at what cost? Catherine watches me suspiciously. I think she senses I am not her sister, though we share the same face. The final entry was dated nearly a month later, December 3rd, 1906. Catherine discovered the truth. She found me speaking to Elizabeth in the mirror, trying desperately to free her. Catherine threatened to tell Father everything. We struggled and she fell, her head striking the corner of the fireplace. There was so much blood. Father and Mother believe it was an accident. They grieve for Catherine, while I continue my masquerade as Elizabeth. Sometimes I see both my sisters in the mirrors now, watching me accusingly. I've covered every reflective surface in my room, but I cannot escape them. The specialist from the asylum visited again today. He observed me closely at dinner. I fear he suspects something is amiss. Father mentioned that after the new year I might benefit from some time at a sanitarium in Switzerland. For my grief, he claims. I know what this means. They plan to lock me away after all, just as they planned for Margaret. The irony is unbearable. I've decided to end this charade. Tonight, I'll break every mirror in this house in hopes of freeing Elizabeth and joining Catherine. If anyone finds this account, know that I am not Elizabeth Beck. I am, and have always been, Margaret. The journal ended there. Emma sat in stunned silence, the implications washing over her. According to this account, her great-grandmother wasn't Elizabeth at all, but Margaret, who had somehow trapped her sister in a mirror and accidentally killed the 3rd triplet. If this journal was authentic, Emma's entire family line descended not from Elizabeth Beck, but from the hidden sister who had stolen her identity. The house creaked around her, as if responding to her realization. Emma glanced again at the mirror, half expecting to see the trapped Elizabeth staring back at her. Instead, she saw only her own reflection, her features eerily similar to those in the portrait above the fireplace. "This is absurd," Emma said aloud, her academic mind rebelling against the supernatural explanation. There must be a rational explanation. Margaret must have been mentally ill, inventing this bizarre story to cope with her isolation. Yet the photograph with its inexplicable 3rd figure remained difficult to dismiss. And hadn't Charlotte mentioned having nightmares as a child about a woman standing in her doorway? Emma returned the journal to its box, but kept the daguerreotype of the 3 infant girls. She needed more evidence before she could accept such an outlandish story. The 3rd floor, Margaret's purported prison, might hold answers. The stairs to the 3rd floor were behind a door that had been painted shut decades ago. Emma used the letter opener to break the seal, wincing at the damage to the historic property. The staircase was narrow and steep, the wood groaning under her weight as if no one had climbed these steps in a century. The 3rd floor was a single large space under the eaves, dusty and untouched by the preservation efforts evident in the rest of the house. A single iron bed frame stood against one wall. Opposite was a dressing table with a cracked mirror, its silvering flaking away with age. Emma approached the mirror cautiously. In its distorted surface, her reflection appeared fractured and multiplied, as if several versions of herself were looking back. Just a trick of the broken glass, she told herself, yet she couldn't help but reach out to touch the cold surface. As her fingers made contact with the mirror, a sharp pain shot through her hand. She jerked back, finding a thin cut across her fingertip, presumably from a jagged edge of the glass. A drop of blood welled up, falling onto the dusty surface of the dressing table. Immediately, the temperature in the room plummeted. Emma's breath clouded in front of her face as frost began to form on the broken mirror. In its fractured surface, she no longer saw her own reflection, but the faces of 2 young women, identical to each other and eerily similar to Emma herself, their mouths moving silently, eyes wide, with what might have been warning or pleading. "Elizabeth? Catherine?" Emma whispered, her academic skepticism crumbling in the face of what she was seeing. The figures in the mirror became more agitated, their silent movements more urgent. Then, alarmingly, a pale hand pressed against the other side of the glass, causing the mirror to bulge outward as if it were a thin membrane rather than solid glass. Emma stumbled backward, knocking over a small side table. A loud crash echoed through the house as a candlestick fell to the floor. The mirror returned to normal instantly, just broken glass reflecting the dusty attic room. Her heart pounding, Emma fled down the stairs, not stopping until she reached the comparative safety of the 2nd floor hallway. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another text from Charlotte. "Are you okay? Had a terrible nightmare about you. Call me now." Before Emma could respond, she heard a sound from downstairs, the front door opening and closing. Someone had entered the house. "Hello," she called, her voice shaking. "Is someone there?" No response came, but she heard footsteps crossing the foyer below. Cautiously, Emma descended the main staircase. In the sitting-room doorway stood a woman with her back turned, wearing what appeared to be a modern dress. "Excuse me, this house is private property," Emma began, then stopped abruptly as the woman turned around. It was Charlotte. "Thank God," Emma breathed. "You scared me half to death." "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Charlotte looked pale, her usually animated face serious. "I tried calling, but you didn't answer. After my nightmare, I just got in the car and drove straight here. Something's wrong with this house, Em. I could feel it even before I arrived." Emma hesitated, then showed her sister the daguerreotype of the 3 infant girls and explained what she'd found in Margaret's journal. Charlotte listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "That explains so much," she said when Emma had finished. "The family history of nervous disorders, the mirrors covered in black cloth when great-grandmother died, the recurring dreams." "You can't possibly believe this," Emma protested. "A woman who could project herself into mirrors, sisters trapped in reflections. It's clearly the delusion of a disturbed mind." "Then how do you explain the photograph, the 3rd figure that appeared behind them? Double exposure, photographic error, any number of technical explanations." Charlotte shook her head. "What about what you just saw upstairs? The frost on the mirror, the hand pressing through? I was influenced by the journal Power of Suggestion, my mind playing tricks." "Then explain this." Charlotte said quietly, rolling up her sleeve to reveal a series of thin scars across her inner arm. "When I was 12, during those nightmares I told you about, I would wake up with fresh cuts, like something had been scratching me from inside the mirror beside my bed." Emma stared at her sister's arm, her rational mind struggling to find an explanation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried. You said I was doing it to myself in my sleep. Mum finally had the mirror removed from my room and the nightmares stopped." Charlotte looked around the sitting room, her gaze lingering on the large mirror. "There's something else I never told you. In my nightmares, the woman always said the same thing. Free us before she returns." "She? Who's she?" "I think," Charlotte said slowly, "she meant Margaret, or whatever Margaret became after what she did." A sudden draught extinguished the lamp nearest to them, plunging that corner of the room into shadow. Both sisters jumped at the sound of something heavy falling upstairs. "We should leave," Charlotte urged. "Whatever grandmother wanted you to discover, you've found it. The inheritance isn't worth this." Emma hesitated. Her academic curiosity warred with her growing fear. "I need to understand what really happened. If this isn't some elaborate hoax, then our entire family history is based on a lie. Great-grandmother Elizabeth was actually Margaret, a woman who murdered one sister and somehow trapped another in a mirror. If the journal is true," Charlotte pointed out, "then Margaret tried to end the deception. The final entry suggests she planned to break all the mirrors to free Elizabeth and join Catherine, presumably in death. But something must have gone wrong," Emma mused. "The public record shows Elizabeth Beck lived until 1963. She married, had children, maintained a respected position in Denver society. What if it wasn't Margaret who continued living as Elizabeth?" Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if whatever she did with the mirrors that night worked differently than she expected?" Before Emma could respond, the lights throughout the house flickered, then went out completely. In the sudden darkness, both sisters froze, listening to the sound of footsteps moving across the floor above them, in the room where no one should be. Charlotte gripped Emma's arm. "We need to leave, now!" But as they turned toward the foyer, they saw that the large mirror above the fireplace was glowing with a faint blue light. In its surface, they could see not their own reflections, but the sitting room as it had appeared in 1906, with 3 identical young women now standing side by side before the fireplace. The sisters stood transfixed as the scene in the mirror played out like a silent film. The 3 identical women, Elizabeth, Catherine and Margaret, moved around the sitting room of 1906, their mouths moving in what appeared to be a heated argument. 2 wore formal dresses, while the third was in a simpler garment, a nightgown or house dress. "Which one is which?" Charlotte whispered. "I don't know," Emma replied, unable to look away. "They're completely identical." In the mirror, one of the triplets suddenly lunged at another, pushing her toward the fireplace. The third tried to intervene, and in the struggle, one fell, her head striking the corner of the mantel exactly as described in Margaret's journal. But from this angle, it was impossible to tell which sister had fallen. The 2 remaining sisters knelt beside the fallen one, their faces masks of horror. Then one turned to look directly out of the mirror, directly at Emma and Charlotte, her eyes widening in recognition. She pressed her hands against the glass as if trying to break through. The other sister noticed and pulled her away. They struggled again, this time before the mirror itself. A bright flash of light illuminated the glass, momentarily blinding Emma and Charlotte. When their vision cleared, the mirror showed only their own reflections, pale and frightened in the darkness of the house. "Did you see that?" Charlotte gasped. "She looked right at us. She knew we were watching." A crash from upstairs broke their paralysis. Charlotte pulled Emma toward the front door, but it wouldn't open. The lock had somehow engaged itself. "The back door," Emma suggested, but as they turned toward the kitchen, all the doors leading out of the foyer slammed shut simultaneously. "It's keeping us here," Charlotte said, panic rising in her voice. Just like the journal said, Margaret trapped Elizabeth in the mirrors somehow. What if she's been waiting all this time for someone to help her finish what she started? That's impossible, Emma insisted, though her confidence was waning. If Margaret really did switch places with Elizabeth, she died decades ago. Did she? Or did whatever happened that night in 1906 change her somehow? Charlotte glanced nervously at the mirror. What if she found a way to exist in the reflections, waiting for the right moment to return? The temperature in the foyer dropped suddenly, their breath visible in the cold air. Frost began to form on the mirror's surface, spreading from the center outward in delicate crystalline patterns. Emma's rational mind made one last attempt at explanation. It's just an old house with faulty wiring and poor insulation. The power's out, so the heating system... She stopped as words appeared in the frost on the mirror, written as if by an invisible finger. 3 souls, 1 face, the cycle continues. Charlotte grabbed a heavy bronze bookend from a nearby table. We need to break the mirrors, all of them. That's what Margaret was trying to do at the end, break the mirrors to free Elizabeth and join Catherine. Or that's what something wants us to think, Emma countered, academic caution reasserting itself. What if breaking the mirrors makes things worse? What if it releases whatever is trapped inside? We can't just do nothing! Charlotte raised the bookend, ready to smash the mirror. Wait! Emma caught her sister's arm. The journal said Margaret cut her hand on a broken mirror, and that's how this all started, with blood on reflective glass. What if blood is the key? Not breaking the mirrors, but a blood connection to whoever is trapped inside. Charlotte lowered the bookend slowly. Our blood. We're direct descendants. Of one of them, at least, Emma agreed. Though we don't know which one. Another crash from upstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Something was moving through the house, breaking every mirror it encountered. The sisters looked at each other in silent understanding. They needed to act quickly. Emma touched her still bleeding fingertip from the cut in the attic. It's worth trying. She approached the frosted mirror cautiously, Charlotte close behind her. The house had gone utterly silent, as if holding its breath. Emma pressed her bloodied finger to the cold glass. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and from its depths emerged a hand, pale, feminine, reaching toward Emma's. Before she could react, the hand grasped hers, pulling her forward. Charlotte screamed and grabbed Emma around the waist, preventing her from being dragged into the mirror. For a moment, they were locked in a bizarre tug-of-war, Emma's hand seemingly melded with the glass. Then, another hand emerged from the mirror, followed by an arm and shoulder. A young woman's face pressed against the surface from the other side, the glass stretching and distorting around her features like a membrane. With a sound like ice cracking, she began to emerge from the mirror itself. Emma and Charlotte stumbled backward as the figure extracted herself fully from the mirror and collapsed onto the floor of the foyer. A young woman in a formal 1906 dress, her dark hair falling around her face. She looked up at them, her features identical to those in the portrait above the fireplace. "Elizabeth," Emma whispered. The woman nodded weakly. "She trapped me. All these years." Her voice was hoarse from disuse, her accent slightly archaic. "I've tried to warn each generation, but no one could hear me clearly. Until now." "Warn us about what?" Charlotte demanded. "About Margaret." Elizabeth struggled to her feet, steadying herself against the wall. "Margaret is gone. She did try to free me that night, as she wrote in her journal. She broke every mirror in the house, but it wasn't enough." "Then who continued living as Elizabeth Beck? Who was our great-grandmother?" Emma asked. "Neither of us," Elizabeth said grimly. "When Margaret broke the mirrors that night, something else came through, something that had been waiting in the space between reflections. It took her place, assumed her identity, assumed the identity she had stolen from me. It's been living as a Beck ever since, passing itself down through the generations." "Passing itself down?" Charlotte repeated. "What does that mean?" A door slammed upstairs, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps descending the main staircase. Elizabeth's face contorted with fear. It moves from mother to daughter when the time is right. Haven't you wondered why every firstborn daughter in our family bears such a strong resemblance to the original Beck sisters? Why they all suffer from nervous conditions around mirrors? It's preparing them, preparing you. Emma felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the cold air. Preparing us for what? To be vessels. It can't maintain a single form forever. It needs to transfer itself periodically to survive. It's been waiting for one of you to come to this house where the boundary is thinnest. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Elizabeth pressed herself against the wall, trembling visibly. "It's here," she whispered. From the shadow of the staircase stepped an elderly woman, her back bent with age, but her movements unnaturally fluid. Her face was deeply lined, her white hair thin, but her eyes were sharp and alert, and fixed on Emma and Charlotte with disturbing intensity. "Grandmother?" Charlotte gasped. The old woman smiled, but the expression never reached her eyes. "Not quite," she said, her voice carrying the same archaic accent as Elizabeth's. "Though I wore Marion's form for many years, she was an excellent vessel, until her heart began to fail." Emma stepped in front of Charlotte protectively. "What are you?" "I've had many names over the centuries. I existed in reflections long before humans learned to create mirrors." The thing wearing their grandmother's form moved closer, its movements becoming smoother, more youthful with each step. The Beck triplets were a rare opportunity, 3 souls sharing one face. Such perfect vessels, already connected to the world of reflections through their identical nature. "You're the 3rd sister in the photograph," Emma realized. "Not Margaret projecting herself, but you, watching them from the mirror." "Very good, Professor Thorne. I've always admired your intellect." "You'll make an excellent host." The creature's face began to shift subtly, the wrinkles smoothing out, features rearranging to more closely resemble Emma's. "That's why you left the house to me in grandmother's will," Emma said, backing away. "You needed me to come here willingly." "The transition works best with consent," the creature agreed, "though it's not strictly necessary. Your grandmother was reluctant, but she came to appreciate our arrangement eventually." Elizabeth moved forward, placing herself between the sisters and the creature. "You've taken enough from our family. I won't let you take them too." The creature laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "You've been trapped in reflections for over a century, Elizabeth. You have no power here." "Perhaps not alone." Elizabeth reached back, taking Emma's still bleeding hand in her right and Charlotte's in her left. "But blood calls to blood. 3 women of Beck lineage, standing together in this house, just as it was in 1906. The creature's confidence faltered. It looked from one woman to another, its borrowed features contorting with sudden concern. 3 souls, 1 face, Elizabeth continued, her voice strengthening. That works both ways, doesn't it? 3 can trap as well as be trapped. The mirrors throughout the house began to vibrate, emitting a high-pitched tone that made Emma's teeth ache. The creature backed toward the staircase, its form fluctuating between the elderly Marion and something else, something with too many angles and reflective surfaces where flesh should be. "Break the circle and run," Elizabeth whispered urgently to the sisters. "I'll hold it here." "We can't leave you," Emma protested. "I died a century ago, Emma. My body is long buried. This form is temporary, a reflection given substance by your blood and belief. But I can use it to finish what Margaret tried to do." Charlotte gripped Elizabeth's hand tighter. "What will happen to you?" "I'll finally be at peace. With Catherine, with Margaret. It's long overdue." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "Now go." With a final squeeze of their hands, Elizabeth released them and charged at the creature, which was now fully transformed into a shifting, mercurial shape of reflective surfaces and sharp edges. The two collided in a shower of what looked like glass shards, the creature howling with a sound that made the windows rattle in their frames. Emma grabbed Charlotte's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen. Behind them, Elizabeth and the creature grappled in a surreal battle, their forms merging and separating like quicksilver. The walls of the house began to shake, picture frames crashing to the floor. "The back door!" Emma shouted over the cacophony. They burst into the kitchen, just as all the glass in the cabinets shattered simultaneously. Charlotte screamed, covering her face as shards flew past them. Emma yanked open the back door, relieved to find it unlocked, and pulled her sister out into the cold night air. They ran across the backyard, not stopping until they reached Emma's rental car. Looking back, they saw the windows of Beck House glowing with an intense blue light. Silhouettes moved frantically behind the glass, more than 2 figures, as if dozens of people were suddenly filling the old house. "What's happening?" Charlotte gasped, clutching her bleeding arm where a glass shard had caught her. "I think," Emma began, then stopped as a high-pitched wail emanated from the house, a sound so piercing it seemed to vibrate through their bones. The blue light intensified, pouring from every window and crack in the structure. Then suddenly, every window in Beck House exploded outward. The sisters ducked behind the car as glass rained down across the property. When they dared to look again, the house stood dark and silent, smoke or mist drifting from the shattered windows. "Is it over?" Charlotte whispered. As if in answer, a final crash came from within the house, the distinctive sound of a large mirror breaking. The silence that followed was profound. Emma's academic mind was already trying to process what they had witnessed, searching for rational explanations and finding none. "We should call the police." "And tell them what?" Charlotte asked. "That our great-grand-aunt from 1906 just battled a mirror demon in our grandmother's house?" Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number contained just 3 words. "It is finished." They sat in the car, catching their breath and watching the house. Nothing moved within it. After several minutes, Emma made a decision. "We need to make sure. Whatever just happened, we need to verify it's really over." Charlotte looked at her incredulously. "You want to go back in there? We'll stay together. Just a quick check to make sure Elizabeth succeeded." Reluctantly, Charlotte agreed. Armed with flashlights from the car's emergency kit, they cautiously approached the house. The front door hung open, swinging gently in the night breeze. Glass crunched under their feet as they entered the foyer. The destruction was extensive. Every mirror in sight had been shattered, along with all the windows. The portrait above the fireplace had been slashed, the canvas hanging in ribbons. Of Elizabeth and the creature, there was no sign. "Look," Charlotte said, pointing her flashlight at the floor. Where the large mirror had stood, there was now only an empty frame, with fragments of glass scattered across the hardwood. But in the center of the debris lay 3 identical antique lockets, arranged in a perfect triangle. Emma knelt and carefully picked one up. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of all 3 Beck sisters, smiling together, an image that had never existed in reality. "Do you think they're finally together?" Charlotte asked softly. "I hope so," Emma replied, closing the locket. She gathered all 3, placing them carefully in her pocket. They completed their inspection of the house, finding nothing remaining. In the study, Emma collected both journals, Elizabeth's and Margaret's, along with the original photograph that had started everything. These were their family's true history, however bizarre and tragic. As dawn broke over the Rocky Mountains, Emma and Charlotte sat on the front steps of Beck House, watching the sunrise paint the shattered windows with golden light. "What now?" Charlotte asked. Emma considered the question. "We rebuild, I suppose. Clean up the house, replace the glass, decide whether to keep it or sell it." "That's not what I meant." "I know." Emma sighed, fingering the lockets in her pocket. "The truth is, I don't know. Our family history is nothing like we thought. Our great-grandmother wasn't who we believed she was. For generations, something else lived among us, wore our relatives' faces, raised our parents. But it's gone now," Charlotte said firmly. "Elizabeth made sure of that. We're free to be whoever we choose to be. Emma nodded slowly. There's one more thing we need to do. Later that day, they stood in Denver's historic Riverside Cemetery before a modest gravestone marked Catherine Beck, 1887–1906, beloved daughter and sister. Beside it was a larger monument for Elizabeth Beck Williams, 1887–1963, their supposed great-grandmother. But there was no marker for Margaret Beck, the hidden triplet whose existence had been erased from family records. Emma placed one locket at the base of Catherine's headstone and another at Elizabeth's. The third she kept in her hand, uncertain. "We should have a marker made," Charlotte suggested. "For Margaret. She deserves to be remembered properly." "I agree," Emma said, "though I'm not sure where her remains would be, if she was truly hidden away all her life." "It's not about the remains," Charlotte replied. "It's about acknowledgement. Recognition that she existed, that she was part of our family." Emma nodded, finally placing the third locket in the space where Margaret's headstone would eventually stand. As she did, a sense of completion washed over her, a feeling that something long unbalanced had finally been set right. In the weeks that followed, Emma and Charlotte worked to restore Beck House, replacing the broken windows and mirrors. They hired historians and archivists to help them piece together the true story of the Beck triplets, separating fact from the supernatural elements they had witnessed. The official record would never reflect the full truth. How could it? But they ensured that Margaret's existence was formally acknowledged in family documents and histories. A modest headstone was placed beside her sisters, reading simply, "Margaret Beck, 1887–1906, no longer hidden." Emma eventually claimed her inheritance, converting Beck House into a small historical museum dedicated to early 20th century Denver society, with special emphasis on the lives of women during that era. A section on the Beck sisters featured the original photograph with its mysterious third figure, a conversation piece that visitors found endlessly fascinating. Charlotte, meanwhile, explored her newfound sensitivity to the world of reflections. Though the entity was gone, something had awakened in her during that night at Beck House, a heightened awareness of the thin boundaries between worlds. She became a sought-after consultant for paranormal researchers, approaching the field with a blend of skepticism and openness that Emma had come to appreciate in herself as well. They never again experienced anything as dramatic as that night in Beck House. But occasionally, standing before a mirror in just the right light, at just the right angle, they would catch a glimpse of three young women in period dress, standing together as they never had in life. Elizabeth, Catherine, and Margaret, finally united and at peace. As for the creature that had worn their grandmother's face, that had lived among them for generations, they found no further trace of it. The journal suggested it had been drawn to the Beck triplets' unique connection to the world of reflections, a connection that ended when Elizabeth sacrificed herself to trap it. 1 year after that fateful night, Emma and Charlotte returned to Beck House for a private ceremony of remembrance. They stood before the fireplace where it had all begun, a new mirror now hanging above the mantel. In its reflection, they saw only themselves, two sisters with the distinctive Beck features, the latest in a lineage that would continue unbroken but forever changed. Emma placed a bouquet of period-appropriate flowers beneath the restored portrait of Elizabeth and Catherine. "Do you think we'll ever know which one of them was really our great-grandmother?" Charlotte asked. "Elizabeth, Margaret, or something else entirely?" Emma considered the question. Her academic mind still sought definitive answers, categorizations, evidence, but her experiences had taught her that some mysteries remain unresolved, some boundaries forever blurred. "I think," she said finally, "that we're thorns, not Becks. Whatever came before, we get to decide who we are now." Charlotte smiled, taking her sister's hand. "3 souls, 1 face, but many possible futures." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the late October sun set beyond the Rocky Mountains. casting long shadows through the house that had harbored secrets for over a century. The legacy of the Beck sisters, all three of them, would continue through Emma and Charlotte, but without the darkness that had haunted previous generations. As twilight fell, they locked up the museum and walked to their cars. Neither noticed the momentary flicker in the porch light's reflection on the windows. Three identical silhouettes raising their hands in farewell, before fading into the gathering darkness. Emma paused at her car door, looking back at the house with a scholar's thoughtful gaze. "You know, there's still so much we don't understand about what happened." "Some things aren't meant to be fully understood," Charlotte replied. "Just experienced, accepted, and remembered." Emma nodded, finally ready to embrace the mystery rather than dissect it. "To the Beck sisters," she said, raising an imaginary glass. "May they rest in peace, together at last." "To the Beck sisters," Charlotte echoed, "and to us, the women who set them free." As they drove away, the lights of Beck House winked out one by one, until only the porch light remained, a single beacon in the darkness, keeping watch over whatever secrets still remained within those historic walls.